Thank you for joining us for this generative AI introduction use cases. This is a presentation that POPVOX Foundation has been offering to Congressional Hill staff for the last 2 years, ever since kind of the end of 2023. We have just really seen the need for helping staff and members understand how generative AI can be used on the Hill in accordance with House and Senate guidance. And so we do a lot of these trainings in person for congressional offices, kind of behind closed doors, so that you can really ask kind of one-on-one questions. But we've had such an uptake of requests to do these trainings that we thought that recording it would be a good choice. And so my name is Aubrey Wilson. I'm Director of Government Innovation for POPVOX Foundation, and I will be your host today on this introduction, like I said, end use cases for AI on the Hill. So I always like to start these presentations with just a little bit of background about who POPVOX Foundation is. We are a team of prior congressional staffers. Most of us worked on the Hill across essentially most staff roles. We have some on the staff who worked in district offices. I personally worked in DC. I was a legislative assistant member, a legislative correspondent, and then also had committee experience, and I was part of committee leadership toward the end of my last stint on the Hill. And that was actually kind of the shared experience that everyone comes to POPVOX with, and really kind of helps inform what we do, which is we are here to help legislative institutions really advance with their use of technology and internal operations so that they can operate better. We believe that Congress is really upstream of policymaking in the United States. And so our goal is to make sure that the people who are working in legislatures have the best tool in their toolbox to serve their constituents the best way. Over the last 2 years, for me in particular, that has really focused on putting on kind of my old congressional staff hat and thinking about how artificial intelligence can really be used on the Hill. And so over those last 2 years, we put out a ton of resources. And our audience is congressional staff or is legislative staff across both the DC and district teams. And now actually really expanded to have a little bit of an audience as well in state and global legislatures. But once again, like our audience is always thinking about the staff and the members who are in parliamentary or legislative context. And so all of our stuff is really just, once again, with that staff cap on, thinking about how these relate to your workflows, your use cases, working for a member of Congress. When we're talking about artificial intelligence, I think it's really important to kind of set the stage to say that the artificial intelligence that we're talking about now really relates to like Gen AI. And there's a whole kind of history of technology that really came before that also counts as artificial intelligence. Some of these terms might be familiar to you, others not, but they're a really good kind of primer on all of the stepstones that led to Gen AI, and which is generative AI. And just understanding that generative AI didn't just kind of come out of nowhere. It's been something that was technology that's developed over time. And so before you had Gen AI, you had all these kind of narrow AI technology use cases out there. And so here's the list of like the most common ones and actually how you might have come across them or continue to come across them in your daily life. And so machine learning is how Netflix makes recommendations to you about the shows that might appeal to you most, or how when you're online shopping, the cart suggestions. Computer vision is how your iPhone unlocks when you look at it, or how Facebook or iPhoto does photo and face tagging. You have examples of optical character recognition, or OCR. That's technology that actually the U.S. Postal Service has been using for decades to read handwritten notes or addresses on envelopes. And so all of these types of technology are technically artificial intelligence. It's computers taking information in that wasn't necessarily meant for computers to start and analyzing it and helping people understand the recommendations or how the information can be used for kind of a next step. And so these are all narrow AI. So what makes generative AI different is that it essentially takes all of kind of those narrow AI use cases and actually makes them all accessible as one tool through one entry point. And so all of those different kind of narrow AI, if you imagine them all being kind of pieces of a puzzle, what generative AI does is puts them all together into one puzzle that you can actually access or use, or one tool that you can access and use. The number one way that people are coming across the use of Gen AI is obviously through large language models, or LLMs. It's an acronym that, unlike most acronyms used on the Hill, most people actually know what LLMs are around the world, especially nowadays. The biggest large language models that are out there, the most popular, are obviously ChatGPT, which was kind of the first that really kind of broke through and released the first publicly available large language model for individuals to use free. And that was ChatGPT back in 2023. Since then, additional ones that have really busted through in the market is Anthropic's Claude, Google's Gemini, Grok, and then there's also some foreign-based ones, including China's DeepSeek, French's Mistral. And there's a lot of like secondary and third level tiers as well. Large language models are popping up everywhere. So just definitely be aware that it's a marketplace. So now this technology has really kind of been broken in and created. We're seeing more and more large language models created. And they're all tools that are kind of based in the same type of technology. But those are what large language models are. In addition to that technology being accessible through a chatbot, LLM technology is now actually being accessible through different forums as well. And so instead of that chat interface that we're kind of used to seeing for an LLM, like when you put a question into ChatGPT, and now we're actually seeing a new suite of tools release similar to Microsoft Copilot, which is the same technology, but it's actually kind of interwoven through a number of applications. And so Microsoft Copilot is also LLM technology. It's also generative AI, but it doesn't just interact with you through a chatbot interface. It actually pops up as suggestions across kind of the Microsoft suite if you have a Copilot license. And so that's kind of that next evolution of LLMs. So let's actually take this back to Congress. And so now that we kind of have an understanding of a little bit about where this tech came from, this conversation or this presentation is really focused on kind of inspiring and helping kind of settle some fears and some understanding of how LLMs and generative AI can be used in the House and the Senate. So that really, the first step in that is really understanding what's allowed for use and staying within those guidelines. Unlike what might be expected, it's really important to know that the House and Senate have actually put out different guidance on the use of artificial intelligence tools, and they update that guidance over time. And so it's really important to make sure that you are aware of the most recent guidance put out about the tools that are allowed for use on official devices. So this is the House's list. They've approved 4 large language models at this point. It's a ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and Copilot. However, you can't just go onto those websites and start using the free version of those tools on official devices. The House guidance is very specific that these tools can be accessed, but only through a paid subscription account that's hosted by your office, paid through the MRA. And so even if you use a Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini account at home, you can't use your personal account at work, even if it's paid. You need to use a paid account through your office that's been licensed through the House. And that really makes sure that all of the data sharing agreements and protections on that account are in place to really align with House security standards. All of the updates about kind of House AI guidance and rules and even some training resources are available on HouseNet, or if you reach out to House Information Resources or to the AI Office, AI Excellence Office, they have resources there as well. So now let's talk about the Senate. It's actually pretty similar in the sense that it requires the same rules. So you must have a paid account to access the tools. However, the tool list is a little bit shorter. To our knowledge, it includes ChatGPT and Gemini. And I actually want to make a quick second, or take a quick second to actually highlight that the reason I say to my knowledge is that neither the House or Senate's approved list of AI tools is actually public. It's actually behind the House and Senate cybersecurity walls. And so although as an outside organization, we hear reports of which tools are allowed and not allowed, we do want to emphasize to really check with your internal guidance providers to make sure that you know what the internal guidance is. Don't just go off of our presentation here, because it might have updated since this was recorded, or it might have updated since we last checked in and were able to kind of get an understanding of where those guidances and those rules and guidelines were set. So back to the Senate though, like I said, to our knowledge, ChatGPT and Gemini are the 2 tools that are approved for Senate use. The Senate Sergeant Arms CIO office is who puts out the guidance for the Senate. And so that's the team to check with if you work in the Senate. Okay, so let's get into what large language models can do and not do. This presentation is very much built to kind of meet everyone where they are. And so if you are an absolutely brand new user to large language models or to generative AI. We really want to make sure to answer your questions and inform you about what these tools can do. But if you're a little bit more familiar with these tools, some of this might sound repetitive, but stick with us. We'll get to some more advanced use cases later on. But what large language models can do and what they become very notable for is their ability to create text and edit text. So that text generation. They're incredibly helpful with information summarization and analysis. They can very quickly read through full documents and provide information back to you about those documents in a huge variety of ways. They're incredible brainstorming support. So unlike Google, where you ask a question, it will just respond with kind of a list of links. Communicating and talking with an LLM is more like having a conversation with a person. And so to that degree, you can really brainstorm, ask for recommendations. And that's kind of a technology unlock that we haven't really seen before, which makes these tools very unique. Going back to that kind of conversational element, it also allows for you to go back and forth and have kind of a Q&A to really get to, the more knowledgeable and go deeper on a topic, or to test yourself on a topic and do like interview prep, for example. It's incredibly helpful for administrative tasks, anything that is routine or mundane to save you time. LLMs, if you know how to do the right prompt, they're incredible tools to help streamline workflows. They also are great with kind of, once again, that kind of deep research, or helping search through large amounts of information or text. And so a lot of the large language models now have a deep research kind of app or add-on, where it's kind of the difference of asking a question to Google or to a policy expert versus asking for a CRS report. That's kind of the equivalent of doing a prompt versus deep research. A deep research inquiry kind of gives you back a much more kind of research paper approach to a question versus just a regular prompt that you would put in. And I'll go into a little bit more of that later. And then additional kind of cutting edge use cases that we're seeing now, just with the kind of evolution of the technology, is the ability to create specialized bots. These are also known as custom GPTs, or on Claude, they're called projects. On Gemini, they're called gems. The ability to kind of take a large language model and kind of take off a section of it almost, or copy it over, and really specialize that one kind of version of the large language model for a specific use case. And then they're extremely good at code generation or app building. And so if you have a particular vision for like a dashboard or an app that you would like to use, or a program that you wish existed, right now that technology is really getting to the point where it can actually help you create that just through natural language, kind of just by saying, oh my gosh, like this is kind of what I would like, an appropriations tracker to look like that's an active dashboard. Just by explaining in a chat what you want, it will actually build that code and can generate a pretty great beta version of an appropriations tracker. Key limitations, though, of this technology are extremely important to keep in mind. Regardless of how incredible the capabilities are, there's always the caveat that these tools are tools that can kind of be used in intelligent ways and in not so intelligent ways. So it's incredibly important that you know what the limitations are and always keep those in mind. So to that point, it's obviously very well known that large language models can hallucinate. This is when they produce inaccurate references, information, where they make inadequate assumptions. They can create completely falsified citations to information. And so that's a huge limitation of these tools, is that you really have to verify everything that it puts forward or that it produces. It is not a substitute, or these tools are not substitutes for human judgment on policy positions, voting decisions, or constituent service resolutions. To this point, once again, you have to think of it as a tool. At the end of the day, a user is responsible for the use of a tool. And so your human expertise, your expertise as a staffer, as a member of Congress, serving a member of Congress, you are the expert sitting in the seat that you're in, holding the position that you're holding for your office to serve your constituents. And it's your responsibility to know what's being produced under your name. And so to that point, it's your responsibility to make the decisions and be proud of what you put forward. And so you always have to make sure that you, at the end of the day, are making the decision. It's not suitable for processing any type of sensitive or non-public information. Not only does it go for classified information, but just anything that you receive that you do not believe is public information. This can be a shared, like minimal distributed memo that is not public. Even something like that should not potentially be shared with the LLM unless you've really consulted or gone back and asked the producer if it's something that you could potentially put in to help you analyze that information. But otherwise, the best rule of thumb is don't put anything into the large language models that you would not feel confident being made public at some point. The privacy settings to paid subscription models, which is what you're required to use in the House and Senate, the reason why those paid subscription accounts and the use of that is so important is that they have that additional privacy setting enacted, that the models won't learn from you. However, as an extra level of safety, you still have to do this best practice where you still should not put in any additional private or classified or non-public information, just as an extra precaution should some kind of data leak happen or some kind of security breach take place. Lastly, something that I love to always highlight is that as you get more comfortable with these tools, you'll get a lot more confident about what they're able to do. But I really urge you to stay very on top of your own expectations. AI is very unpredictable with its errors. It can do something correctly 5 times, and on the 6th time, for some reason, it might do it wrong. And so even if you have had it produce a report for you and you read through the report and you verified that everything in the report was correct, it doesn't mean that the next report that it produces can just be taken at face value. I highly recommend that you just keep in mind that every time you use these tools, it is a new time using it, and that everything needs to be checked and verified. So, knowing those limitations and the capacity that's possible, we really like to highlight the potential impact of why these tools could really be considered for use on the Hill. POPVOX Foundation, as I said at the beginning, we really believe in a very strong legislative branch. And as prior congressional staffers, or at least even in my own experience as a prior congressional staffer, I would say that when I started really understanding this technology and using it more at work at POPVOX, my mind was just blown with the possibility of how much this can help Hill staffers. There's so much information that comes across your desk, and there's so much constant churn of topics and new policy areas and constituent issues that you've never seen before, especially as a junior staffer, that the learning curve is so steep to stay on top of, regardless of how many years that you've been there, that any tool that can help you synthesize information and learn faster is a benefit. And so the potential impact of AI to be one of those tools in your toolbox to get smarter on policy, to be a better service to your boss, to turn things over faster, but have them still be of quality so that you can get to the next thing on your desk, or so you can spend more quality time doing like very important things like talking to a constituent or really getting deep on a policy issue that you just haven't had the time to do it yet. Like, though, that's the benefit that AI can really provide when used responsibly. And so once again, it can be an incredible capacity booster, even if it's just to take some of the low risk kind of mundane tasks off your plate. It can be an incredible time saver, especially for drafting new content over and over again, or for brainstorming. It's an incredible creative assistant to that end as well. And I honestly think that one of the biggest kind of long-term benefits of this technology is going to be help staffers have burnout prevention. And so I know how absolutely overwhelming working on the Hill can be day in and day out. It's a lot of very, very long days and long hours. And so if this tool is something that can help you just be able to leave the office at 6 or 7 versus 9 or 10, that is a benefit. And so I think all of those are possibilities. Outside of just the fact that it can make work more doable and your workload more manageable, it also is kind of a pretty big existential crisis for Congress right now, with just the idea of just the branch in general taking pace or keeping pace with kind of the outside world, where Congress has been a little bit more slow on the uptake of these tools. Other industries are not that way. And so lobbyists are using artificial intelligence to really improve their outreach to the Hill. I'm sure you are well aware that industries are doing the same. And so as constituent groups continue to do that, or special interest groups, or at the continuation of other industries or other countries, I think that the influx of information to the Hill is going to be so overwhelming that if Congress doesn't have the same tools that those outside groups have, it's really putting the branch at a disadvantage to keep pace. And so outside of just your personal use of these tools, I think it's really important to take kind of a wider look at as well and understand kind of the larger effect that it might happen to the institution if adoption of these tools doesn't take place in a responsible way. So where to start? This is one of my favorite questions that I actually get when doing these trainings. It's just the amount of it, of being overwhelmed. There's so many potentials and use cases of these tools that I think that when you finally decide to start and you open up a chatbot, sometimes putting in that first question can be very intimidating, or you just aren't aware of exactly how it can be used for you. And so that's what this training is for. And so the approach and mindset that we really like to emphasize is that this technology has been designed and it has gotten so popular because of its usability. It's meant to be very user friendly. It's very intuitive, and so it's not intimidating. So I really recommend just going in with that confidence that no prior kind of skill set is needed. If you've ever done a Google search or had a conversation, you can use these tools. They're very common sense. However, once again, it's common sense, but erring with caution. Always having in the back of your mind the fact that it's not necessarily a trusted partner and that it really needs to be double checked and verified with what it gives back to you, but still a tool that can be helpful. The number one tip that we have is to just practice. The more you use it, the more you'll understand what it's capable of, where it can be helpful, where it's not helpful. But there's no magic wand to just pass over to you to have you know those things. For you and your specific position that you're in and your workflows and the things that you do, really the only way to unlock understanding how this tool can help you is by you using it and experimenting with it. If your office isn't quite there yet, but you're curious about this technology, I really recommend that in your personal life, you try it at home. Sometimes doing personal use cases can really help you understand how it would apply in a professional setting. But that's one way that maybe you can advance your own skill set and learning, even if the workplace isn't quite ready to adopt these in your office. When you are using these regarding kind of initial use cases, we really recommend to think about it kind of like you would an intern on their very first day. You're never going to give an intern who is on their very first day in your office the responsibility of writing a final speech for the boss, or the responsibility of completely doing a memo for you that you're then going to send to ledge counsel and write a bill off of. Usually, instead, for an intern, you're going to give them something low risk that you know they can do kind of in the background to save you time, but that you know at the end of the day, when they hand you that product, you're going to double check it and you're going to make sure that it's done correctly. And if it's not done correctly, you're going to give them feedback. That's kind of the way to how to approach large language models when starting out on the hill. Because in that sense, you know their limitations, but you also know that they have a very high potential to be helpful. And so in kind of approaching it like an intern, a couple things to keep in mind is that each large language model has its own personality. Depending on how open your office is to getting licensed to multiple tools, and you get the chance to play with multiple large language models, you'll come to find that they answer questions in very different ways, or they seem to have different personalities. And so a really great example is that I tend to use Claude more often than not, because I find Claude to be a little bit more like familiar, a little bit more like, not like flower, but I guess like conversational, softer, kind of friendlier. I do a lot of kind of narrative building work. And so a lot of the writing that I do or things that I want to brainstorm are in kind of paragraph form versus bullet point form. And so all of those reasons are a reason I like to engage with Claude. ChatGPT, by contrast, is a little bit more direct. It's a little bit more cold, professional. It's perfect for summarizing things in bullet points or for giving you a very kind of black and white analysis of a topic. And so I have found that for people who do kind of research, sometimes they tend to use Claude or ChatGPT, but for individuals who do comms, maybe they tend to use Claude more. And so as you play with these tools, even in your personal life, I really recommend that you actually try pulling up multiple models next to each other and giving them the same prompt and just seeing how the responses vary. It'd be pretty similar to kind of giving a project to a bunch of interns and noticing that each one is going to give you back something slightly different, which then once again goes back to the point that all of this has to be checked, because just the fact that large language models will give you back a variety of ways to answer the same question emphasizes why you, as the human and as the staffer, why you have the responsibility to analyze and compare what those answers say and make sure they align with what your conclusions would be, or that they align with what your boss's views or outcomes or position on something is. So also similar to a first day intern, they're very eager to be helpful. you'll notice that if you put something into a large language model, it's more than likely going to have the first line back to you be very complimentary. It's gonna be, oh my gosh, Aubrey, what a great idea. That's an awesome idea for a research project. Like, here are all the ways that you can go forward with it. And so to that degree, just be very aware that although these large language models are very eager to help, they still have those limitations at play. So they might sound very confident in the answer they're giving you, but in reality, that answer might be incorrect. And so even if they come off very assured and they say, oh, this is the answer to your question, you need to double check that answer. And all of that boils down just once again to the fact that you are responsible for the work that you do and the work that you pass on. So let's talk about prompt drafting. So a prompt is the question that you put into a chat bot or a chat box when you are interacting with a large language model. Prompts can be short, prompts can be long, prompts can be whole pages or paragraphs. And so just recognize that it's essentially the question that you ask or the directions that you give are a prompt. There are lots of ways to craft a prompt, but I really want to emphasize that, especially over the last couple of years, there's been a whole kind of industry created of people who are talking about how prompt generation and kind of prompt manipulation is a true art form. And you will find this to be true. You'll notice that how you ask the question greatly determines the answer that you get back from the large language model. And so to that degree, that's where your practice really comes into play. The more that you practice with answering and asking questions that the LM gets back to you or that you first pose to the large language model, that will help you understand how you need to craft a prompt to get what you need out of it. The overall kind of lesson to be learned is that garbage in leads to garbage out. The more specific and detailed and kind of intentionally you write a prompt, the more likely the large language model is going to answer that question or do that task correctly for you, which will save you the most time. And so definitely experiment with prompt drafting and know that just if something comes back and it's not how you want it to be, go back and re-ask the question in a different way. Don't just give up on the tool. It's a tool. You have to learn how to use it. And so even if the tool doesn't work the first time, it doesn't mean the tool is necessarily broken. It just means that maybe you need to adjust your approach a little bit. So think of it that way and don't give up. So prompt drafting kind of do's. Once again, be specific. And this doesn't mean that you have to put in specific details. For example, you don't have to list that you work for a specific member of Congress, but you can say, I work for a member of Congress. You don't have to say what kind of staffer you are or your specific title or your name, but you can say, I'm a communications director for a member of Congress who is a Republican from Georgia, and I need to write this thing on this topic. Like anything that you can do to help it understand who you are to a degree and the context in which you're answering your question will help it then personalize that question on the back end. Imagine it being kind of like a research assistant. The more you give the research assistant, or once again, that day one intern, the more you give them to understand the context around the question, the more likely they are to understand what you're hoping to get out of that answer. That goes back to the providing context. Large language models don't know who you are. If you ask them for an update on transportation policy, they don't know if you're asking that question from the perspective of a transportation staffer sitting in the U.S. House of Representatives, or if you're a transportation staffer sitting in Spain, or if you are just an individual who cares about transportation policy and you're sitting in a basement in Puerto Rico on vacation. Like there's no context that these kind of models have to begin with. And so the more that you can explain who you are in the context of answering the question, it'll help it understand once again, what you're hoping to get out of the answer. Ask clear questions. So the more specific you are about exactly what elements of a question you want answered is helpful. And similarly, if you are asking it to help create a memo or talking points or social media content, ask it for or provide for kind of preferred formats. And so if you are looking for talking points for a member of Congress in a hearing, you know that your questioning time is limited to 5 minutes. And so you're not going to ask it for an oral statement that's an hour long. You're going to ask it for bullet points that a member can use in a 5-minute questioning period for the witnesses, for example. And so the more that you can provide a context about not only what kind of the question you're asking is, but also the format of how you would like the answer, that can save you all that time in the back end of having to retake the information it gives you and reformat it yourself. And then lastly, I really recommend that you remember that you can iterate and refine. And so unlike Google or unlike putting in a Google search where you ask the question, it just gives you the answers. And then if that's not quite right, you have to just go back and start from scratch, which is a better Google search. Large language models like having a conversation. And so if you ask for an update on transportation policy and it gives you this like widely broad range of answers and you're like, whoa, that's not what I wanted. You can go back and be like, no, I apologize. I actually specifically meant transportation issues in the state of Indiana on the federal level. And that will actually help you refine that query and get you more helpful information back. Similarly, I'll point out, and I might get this later, but if you're doing communications, content drafting, and it comes back and the tone is off, it's either too casual or too professional or too weedy, you can ask it to adjust that tone. And that's another thing that it's able to do, and that can save a lot of time. For actually reviewing the content that is created, once again, you need to review and verify. We can't say that enough. Ask those follow-up questions. And then one of my favorite things to do is ask it to seek out like multiple perspectives for you. And so when it does give you an answer to a question, if you feel like it's only giving you one perspective, ask it for other perspectives, or say, if I am a small business owner, how would I evaluate this policy affecting my business? Or if I was the stakeholder group, how would I potentially perceive this? And that kind of goes back to that brainstorming of kind of thinking more holistically about a policy implication. These tools are incredible brainstorming partners that can really help you kind of think through different arguments around a policy in ways that otherwise you would have to just be brainstorming with your team potentially. When also doing prompts, a couple other tips is to minimize hallucinations by actually providing resources directly to the large language model. And so one of the most common use cases we see on the Hill right now for LLMs is summarization of reports and documents. Like I said earlier, there's a huge amount of information that comes across Hill staffers' desks. And so it makes total sense that the number one use case that we see is people trying to figure out how to read and digest that information quickly. And with large language models' ability to summarize, it's a great kind of entry-level use case for these tools. But the way to minimize hallucinations with what the large language models get back to you is actually to give it the source documentation of what you're interested in. And so, for example, if you, once again, going back to, the idea of getting the most recent updates on transportation policy, if there is a recent CRS report that got posted and a couple of reports that got posted by or shared with you by trade associations that are also public reports, you can actually attach all those reports directly into a large language model's chat and say, just sourcing from these reports, please create me a one-page memo of the biggest, most important takeaways that I should know as a legislative staffer from a member from X state regarding the transportation policies that's in this memo. And then that way it really minimizes hallucinations because it's focusing its sources on these particular reports. But then also you can go back with the memo it gives you and ask it to cite the page numbers of each report so you can more easily go back and double check exactly where in those reports that's from. Also, if it shows you an idea that says, oh, this is a finding of one of these reports and you want to learn more about that, then you can go back to that specific report and that finding number, and you can actually read that section of the report so you can get that kind of deep dive on that part of the information that is most relevant for you versus having to read the whole report front to back. The last tip I wanted to highlight for prompt drafting was the idea of creating a customized prompt guidance document. This is something that we've seen a little bit on the state level, actually, but I think it's a fabulous idea for time saving. If you're finding that you are doing the same task over and over and over again with a large language model, and you are putting in the same directions over and over again into that prompt box, to save you time, you can actually kind of standardize that prompt by creating a Word document and putting in those details in that, and then just attaching that Word document every time. And so a really good example is if you are a communications staffer for a member of Congress and you use large language models to help draft talking points on like hot topics or cutting edge news stories or breaking news stories. And you want to do that quickly so that your boss always has on hand 3 or 4 really good talking points, so that they can really quickly kind of like be ready for, walking out of the chamber, walking out of committee, and engaging with press. Instead of every single time going on to the LM and saying, the speaker of these is, or I'm drafting comments for, a member of Congress on breaking news topics. Always make sure that the talking points are optimistic, but, recognize that action is needed, that they're professional, that they're not too wordy, that the audience is constituents, that the bullet points, or that the talking points be presented in bullet point form, that they are short, direct sentences that are impactful, that the use of analogy is used to make these things more salient for constituents back home. Kind of those kind of overall broad goals for how you always want your talking points to be. Those things go in a prompt document that you have saved on your desktop. And then every single time that a new topic comes up, you can pull over that prompt document and say, in the LM, say, following the guidance that's in the attached document, help me draft talking points to my member on this topic. And then it will already know all of those kind of additional topics to get that first to kind of go bite at the apple of that prompt closer to the outcome that you really want, to hopefully be helpful for you and your member. Okay. I'm gonna actually skip the demo for the moment, but we'll do it afterwards. But really quickly, I just wanted to put on screen. I recognize this is a very wordy slide, but this is a huge overview of kind of an imagination brainstorming dump of some really easy to use cases for large language models across a couple different kind of task types, just to kind of get your wheels turning. So feel free to pause or screenshot this for some inspiration for any of these that you see that you're curious about as a potential use case for yourself. Pull over that bullet point once again into a large language model and say, I, heard that large language models could, for example, help create surveys to help gather constituent feedback. Can you explain to me how this would actually work in practice? And the large language model can actually walk you through step by step and brainstorm with you how that particular use case could apply to your office and be really meaningful or impactful. And so even though I'm not going to go through and provide a demo of every single one of these potential use cases, please note they're very accessible to you. So once again, just use, have it be a use case for large language models of how they can actually walk you through some use cases. But I will also add that this is not an exhaustive list. We actually put out a really neat resource at POPVOX Foundation last year called it was our AI summer camp, and now it's actually being rebranded as our AI field guide to kind of make it evergreen, since it is no longer summer that we are recording this video. But if you go on to popvox.org/camp, you'll actually find that we took kind of the 6 most common AI use case types, and we broke them down by staff type, and then actually have sample prompts and use cases per staff type across all the 6 major use cases. And so I highly recommend checking out that resource. It's very fun, very accessible, and hopefully it's something that can really kind of boost your creativity of brainstorming of how this really can apply to you, whether you're a staff assistant all the way up to the chief of staff, the LD, the member, the district director, caseworkers, field reps, and everyone in between. Which then kind of gets me to the next slide, which is one of my favorites. This is the current use cases that we know are taking place across Congress. So whether these are use cases that were shared with us when we were doing these trainings with offices, or ones that we've heard through the grapevine that are very popular. These are ones that your colleagues and your peers are using large language models for across the House and the Senate. And so most of these are pretty low risk, especially if you consider that they're drafting content to then massively be reviewed and verified and kind of go through an approval process before they're ever shared publicly. But it does show us where some of these time-saving use cases are already being used and kind of de-risked across the House and the Senate. In addition to kind of the use cases that we shared here and videos like this and the AI summer camp or field guide that I mentioned earlier, POPVOX Foundation continues to put out resources for the Hill and for legislatures globally and on the state level about how to use AI in legislative settings. And so in our conversations across the Hill, we get a lot of ideas proposed to us about how AI can be used for different either use cases, or if there's a new kind of tool that comes out, how it can be applied to a congressional kind of setting. So two really good recent examples of that is there's that kind of custom GPT or kind of customized large language model use case that's possible. So we actually put out a guide on creating and using custom GPTs through ChatGPT. And that's available on our website. It actually walks you through step by step how to do that and some use cases. That's a really cool idea. We've seen certain offices use custom GPTs to create kind of communications bots that are really great for copy editing all of the work that goes out of an office to make sure that everything is kind of standardized. We've also seen ones that have been produced for kind of oversight purposes where all of the public kind of congressional record or congressional reports about an entire topic are fed into one bot so that staff can inquiry it quickly. And it's kind of like a specialized research assistant on a very specific oversight topic. So we've seen that use case. We're starting to hear about some use cases for specialized bots that are trained on appropriations use cases as well, so that staff can very quickly inquiry and feed through information that has to do with all the appropriations language in the past that's been proposed for any specific topic. And so those ChatGPT, custom GPTs, or those Claude projects, same type of tool, those are really neat tools for a lot of different potential use cases, both internal to the administration of kind of offices or office use cases inside of congressional offices and teams, but also for actual policy work as well. And then the second, resource that we put out based on kind of a call from staff was that deep research of how to use deep research in a congressional office. And so we have a primer for that as well. We have some stuff that's specifically for change management for chiefs, because we've had a lot of people raise workforce concerns with us about how to implement this responsibly across the team. So we're starting to really help engage in those conversations as well. Okay, so before I close up, I'm going to stop my screen share and actually pull up and do a couple use case demos just to showcase what's possible in case you haven't worked with these tools before. Okay, so I want to do a couple demos. So as you can see, I pulled up Claude. So Claude is my large language model of choice. As I was saying earlier, they all have slightly different personalities. So as you get to use these tools over time, you will probably also develop a preference. Claude is available for use on the House side, but is not available for use on the Senate side. So if you are a Senate staffer, just beware that Claude is not accessible to you on official devices. However, it works the same way as the ChatGPT interface or as Google Gemini. And so even though this is Claude, please know that the use cases are the same. So if you've never been here before, this is what interacting with a large language model looks like if it's through kind of this kind of chat face. As I was saying earlier on, large language models can now kind of appear in our lives in a lot of different ways. And so Microsoft Copilot does have Copilot Chat, which is the equivalent of this, but also it has integration across a bunch of the different Microsoft suite applications. And so just be aware this is like right now how most large language models are interacted with, but that in the future that might change. And so the chatbot is just where you can put in a question. I want to start really kind of just very basic. And so I'm going to actually drop in a prompt here. And so as we talked about with kind of the prompt best practices, it's good to give context. And so here's an example of what that could look like. So I'm new to the commercial space. I'm new to the policy topic of commercial space policy. Can you summarize this bill in 3 to 4 sentences explaining what problem it's trying to solve and what it would do? So I'm going to actually edit this slightly and say I'm a new LA working in Congress, covering the portfolio of commercial space policy. And you can see that I actually reference a bill here. And so you can try to have it pull the bill from congress.gov. But as we were talking about earlier, to kind of minimize hallucinations, you can actually attach documents directly. And so what that looks like is hitting this little plus sign, adding a file. As you can see, you can also add screenshots. And so if you're looking at a policy proposal, or if you're looking at a news article, and instead of trying to download that file, you can actually just attach a screenshot. If you're having a problem with something, so for example, if you are working with an Excel document that has been tracking policy in your office forever, and there's a broken formula in it and you can't figure out how to fix the formula, you can take a screenshot of the sheet and the formula, assuming that it's all non-classified, non-sensitive information, of course, and attach it here and ask you for help on solving that formula, and it can be incredibly helpful there. And so there's lots of options. But I'm going to add a file, and here's the bill right here. And I'm just going to attach this. This is just the PDF that's been downloaded from congress.gov. It was a bill that was introduced in the 118th Congress, so not a currently relevant bill. And just another kind of just awareness point that if you are using it for any kind of bill analysis currently, and it's a bill that has not yet been introduced yet, it's just a flag that would mean that it's not public yet. And so just have a note of awareness and caution of attaching anything that has not yet been introduced, because that technically is not public. But in this case, this bill is public. So once again, I'm a new staffer. I just want to figure out what this bill is about in 3 to 4 sentences because I have no idea. I'm not a commercial space policy expert. So I hit go. As you can see up here, it's named in top left, it's named the chat. And so over here on your left-hand side, you have all these chats. This history right here is where you can actually see all of your chats lined up. And so if you want to return to this conversation in the future, so let's say that 3 months from now, a new version of this bill is introduced in the current Congress, and I want to go back and compare it to this draft, I can actually go back to this exact conversation and continue this conversation, but with the new bill information of the new version. But right now, this is the 3 to 4 sentence summary of this bill. And it's like, oh man, this is super helpful. However, I actually wanted to go deeper. So let's say that was helpful, but not enough information for me. Can you actually do a 1-page memo? And this was a pretty large bill. It was multiple pages. Let's see. Well, let's say affect the state of Texas. So now I've actually asked it for more. So the couple sentences were helpful, but I actually wanted to go into more detail. I wanted to create a 1-page memo for me that specifically now helps me understand how it would impact the state of Texas. So as you can see, it's thinking, and not only that, but they've actually added some transparency measures here where you can actually see what it's doing, which will help you as you ask more complicated prompts. Just be aware that the thinking time takes longer. Also, as you explore deep research and use deep research to have there be more kind of like these, like I was talking about earlier, these kind of big research questions and these big research reports as the answer, those things can take 20 minutes or more for the LLM to respond to. So a couple things are happening right here. So on the left-hand side, it's telling me that it created this document for me, and it pulls out a couple additional information, like highlights that are like really important that it thinks that I should know. But on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll notice it actually created that document for me. And so it's created a memo. It's to me, the legislative assistant, has the date, overview, key provisions, and so forth. And so, depending on what your settings are, you can actually go ahead and just like download this directly, which would download as a PDF, or if you have it attached to a drive, you would be able to download it and then edit it directly, which can save you a lot of time. Alternatively, you can copy and paste the text over, but once again, everything would have to be checked. And so, if there is any key provision in here that it highlights for me that I think is particularly interesting or something that I want to learn more about, I'm going to go back and understand where in that bill it specifically says that and read that section of the bill and check that work. But this is something that initially, as I'm just trying to evaluate this legislation and what's inside and kind of why it would flag for me what's important, that's where it can save me time. Okay, so I want to actually do another use case based off of this bill, but we're going to kind of go a little bit more advanced. And so let's try another prompt here. And so this prompt is, assume that this bill has passed in its current form. I wanted to actually create a visualization of a timeline for me of all the deadlines that are within it for regulatory action so that my boss can perform oversight to make sure all those goals are reached. I want to know which agencies have new responsibilities so we can follow up with them and make sure that they're aware of the provisions in the bill that they're now responsible for. I want to understand what kind of additional infrastructure staffing would be needed for an additional office within the agency, and then help it pre-flag for me potential bottlenecks in implementation that then maybe I can use for my boss's oversight activities in committee. While this is thinking, I'll point out that anytime that a large language model creates a document or a visualization, they're called artifacts. And so if you ever hear that term anywhere, that's what an artifact is. It's something that's created by a large language model. And then all your artifacts that are created are also saved. So on the left-hand side, you can see that you have an artifact catalog. And so if you want to go back and look for a specific artifact that's been created, you don't have to go back to that chat and scroll back up to find it. You can actually go to the artifact catalog and find it there. And they're going to be named, relatively easy, kind of intuitive things. So as you can see, the memo on the side was named the bill number and then the Texas memo. Perfect. While it's thinking, I'm actually just for the appreciation of time, I'm actually going to go ahead and start a new chat and just show you one other use case that I want to kind of go more in weeds on. Earlier on in the presentation, I talked about these customized prompt guidance documents, and I just want to give you an example of what that could look like to kind of put a little bit more meat on that bone, because I really do think that there's something that is an extremely valuable time saver, especially for Hill staff. But I just want to give you an example of what that actually looks like and how to create one using a large language model. And so here's a prompt example. So this is Claude. I'm a communications staffer for a member of Congress in the U.S. House, and I want to create a prompt guidance document that I can attach to every query that relates to drafting oral remarks for my boss. Will you please help me draft this document and propose ideas for what should be included? As a starting point, unless otherwise stated, assume that the oral remarks are limited to 5 minutes. Always present the content in bullet points. My boss prefers short, direct sentences to communicate their ideas, along with a use of easy-to-grasp analogies to make policy more relatable. Always use a professional but relatable tone, and strive toward optimism, but with an underlying direct tone of needing to take action and the importance of the priority at hand. But you'll notice that I also in here asked it to like also fill in the blanks. Like, this is kind of what I'm going for, Claude, but like, what else would be helpful to have in a prompt document to help me accomplish my goals? And so I'm going to ask it to help me create that document. And here's the proposed document. And so this is what one of these would look like. Because this is something you can pull over. You can run up the approval chain in your office and kind of use it. And it also helps put some guardrails around your LLM use for your office. And so if your office has adopted an additional LLM use policy and always wants to make sure that you always attach that use policy as part of your prompts, to just make sure that it's always within the guidelines of your office's set rules. That's another use case of these. But here's an example of what this could look like. And so this is, once again, a prompt guidance document for a communication staffer use of having an LM expedite the drafting of talking points. But so this would be a document that would help inform future prompts to always be limited. And so it took into account what I told it. So once again, keep them to 5 minutes, bullet points. But then down here, it talked about, it added to avoid jargon unless it's widely understood, keep sentences short, direct, and punchy, and avoid compound, complex structures. Include vivid examples or stories, start with the matter and how it affects people's lives, end with a clear, specific call to action. And then, once again, there's more details. It also recommends to me, it says, if you're going to use this prompt document, in addition, make sure to give the large language model additional context about the specific venue, audience, purpose, because it recognizes that those things can change. Perfect. So now that we went over the use case for creating a prompt document, I actually want to return to what we were doing earlier about that space policy and that visualization. So I'm going to go back to the chats. And right here is that space policy summary we were talking about. And if you remember, it was a more advanced use case of having actually create a visualization for us of a timeline and agency roles. And so here was that longer prompt right here. And then while we were over in the other chat, working on that guidance document, actually created this task for us. And so, and as you can see up here, there's still that artifact, which is that original memo that I asked it to create. That was that larger version of the paragraph. But moving down, you can see that here was kind of the key deadlines it brought out. It identified some major implementation bottlenecks for me to be aware of for my boss that I can kind of double check on, or maybe dig a little bit deeper into understanding why it thinks that these are bottlenecks. And then infrastructure needs for additional support to actually make sure this implementation happens in the bottom line. And then here is that timeline I asked it for. And so I'm going to just click on this and it'll open up the artifact on the right-hand side. Perfect. And so here's where it talks about this. And it looks like it redlined some sections for me. Let's see if I can actually download it and what this will look like downloaded here. When I actually download this as a Word document, this is what it ends up looking like for me. And so it has the actual timeline for the implementation of the bill if the bill had been enacted. So it has the short term 0 to 3 or 0 to 30 days, and then actually goes forward to the first 6 months and actually walks through exactly what those deadlines would be. So this is something that I can then have it actually create like a calendar version for me, and something that I can post next to my desk and know when these are, where it's coming up. Let's actually have it be a little bit more helpful. Let's go backwards and say, assume the enactment date, the legislation was, let's just say January 1st of 2026. So I'm asking it if it would actually have the enactment date be January 1st of 2026 and actually present the information as a visual calendar versus as a kind of document where it's all listed like that, more of a visual person. And so let's see what it creates. Okay, so you can see this doing a lot of thinking here. And once again, this is really neat because you can actually kind of follow along. So if you actually click on this caret here, it'll actually open up for you a visualization of what it's actually doing. And so you can see here, it's actually coding that visualization of that calendar for me. So if you ever want to be extremely impressed with how much time it's saving you or what coding used to look like by hand, this is what was kind of the behind the scenes. And so if you're ever curious as to what's taking so long, you can always, like I said, click on that caret and see it in action. Okay, so it just finished up for us, and so so here is what it created. So here's an example of visualizations that once again, this is Claude, but Claude can create. And so over here is our visual calendar of the HR 6131 implementation timelines, assuming that it was enacted on January 1st. It color coded these for me. I didn't pick these colors. If I wanted to change the colors to match our branding scheme in our office, you can just tell it to, and it would do that. But it has red as a critical deadline month, yellow as a statutory deadline, and blue as regular activity. And as you see, it has it here by month. And so It has exactly what would happen with the bill. And depending on what's inside, and then it has some high risk areas. So these are months that a lot of things are due that are very worthy of our attention as an office that's doing oversight of this piece of legislation. And then it goes down. As you can see, it's made this very cute. It has a lot of emoji use. If you want it to be a lot more visual, you can ask it just to remake it with no emojis. If you want to change the font type, like I said, the color scheme, anything else, you can actually create a PDF version of this visualization so that it's printable or something that can be shared on social media. Either this or, obviously an additional visualization it creates. And then it has these critical dates, quick reference. So this is not something that I asked it for, but it just thought that it would be helpful. And then as you can see, there's the stars to signify statutory deadlines. And so these are all of the stars down here. If you go up here and you click over here, this will show you what the HTML version is like behind the scenes. And so if you are coding, you have a coding background, or you're curious what it did to create that, this is what it was doing when it took all that time. And so this is just an example of how these tools can also make policy a lot more accessible by creating visualizations that actually show the effect of bills should it be implemented. Well, I hope that that was a very helpful overview of AI use cases. That has been an hour, and so I will stop there. But please recognize that POPVOX Foundation is always here for you. This is the first of many trainings and many resources that we will continue to provide in the coming months and years as AI continues to be a part of the workplace in the congressional setting. And we hope more and more is adopted in responsible ways to really help congressional staffers in and out of surviving kind of life on the Hill. And so please don't be a stranger. We're on the Hill constantly providing this training in person. So if you think it would be helpful for us to come in and do a closed door briefing with your staff, either in DC or virtually with your district staff, or hybrid with both on the same call, we do those all the time. And so please just reach out and ask us. We'd love to come in and meet with you. And otherwise, give us feedback on this training. What was helpful? What would you like to see more of? Or what's a resource that we can produce that would really help solve some of your problems or answer some of your questions. And with that, I just say thank you for your time.